Hey, fifth graders. All right, so this is going to be lesson 6 of unit 6. This is our final lesson of unit 6. Um, let's talk answers to question or to unit 5 though first. Sorry, I haven't been shaving as much lately. Anyway, what were so number one on the check understanding? What were General Grant's main goals for the Union Army? The answer is B, to destroy Lee's army and capture Richmond. Number two, what was the outcome of Sherman's march? It was C, the South's fighting spirit was broken. Number three, where did Lee surrender to Grant? C, Appomattox, Virginia. Funny story, is actually on Palm Sunday, so it was right before Easter. Number four, where did most of the Civil War battles take place? In the South, basically, is really the answer. Most of the Civil War battles took place in the South. Number five, by 1864, why were so many Northerners ready to allow the South to secede? It was because they'd been dealing with a war for the last 4 years and they were just tired of the war, is the answer there. So for your vocabulary review, the two words are malice and assassination. So number one, blank is a desire to hurt others. That's malice. And number two, the country was shocked by the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. So malice and assassination. Reading comprehension. Read the passage from "O Captain, My Captain." So that was the famous thing from Walt Whitman. What does Whitman mean by "our fearful trip is done"? That means that the Civil War, so B, the Civil War has ended. And what is the prize in line 2? So in line 2, it says, "The ship has weathered every storm. The prize we sought is won." The prize that they had sought was that the United States is still one country. So that answer is C. And that takes you through all of lesson 5. So let's talk lesson 6 here. And I'm going to read almost all of this. It's going to sound terrible, but it's not a war, so I don't geek out quite as much about this particular part. Reconstruction is what this is going to be. It's Reconstruction after. So basically, with the end of the Civil War, the South has really a large portion of it has been destroyed. And so consequently, we talked about like 1 in 4 Southern men were killed in the Civil War, which is a huge, huge amount of people. And their farms were destroyed. It was just a mess. So now we have to come back as a nation. So we have to reconstruct, rebuild our national unity, but also we have to rebuild the South because it is literally destroyed. And unfortunately, Abraham Lincoln has died, and so Andrew Johnson is now the president. He was the vice president. He's now become president. Andrew Johnson he and Lincoln didn't agree on quite a few things. Really, Lincoln picked Andrew Johnson as his running mate almost as a political maneuver, and so consequently, Reconstruction goes a little differently than it would have. So, all right, we'll start reading here. This is A, rebuilding the South. After the Civil War, President Lincoln wanted to end the harsh feelings between the North and the South. Of course, these people have been killing each other for the last 4 years, so he wants to try and get to the point where we can be unified again, as opposed to just, treating the South like, this is all your fault and we're going to punish you for it. Before letting the defeated Confederate states back into the Union, he asked them to take an oath to support the Constitution and the Union. So before his death, Lincoln created a plan for Reconstruction, or rebuilding the South. So that's what Reconstruction means, is rebuilding. In March 1865, he had signed a bill that created the Freedmen's Bureau. This government program was part of Reconstruction. It provided food, clothing, shelter, medical care, jobs, and legal help to both African Americans and whites. It also set up 4,000 schools for newly freed people. So, of course, you have tons and tons of slaves who are now free, but in the South, these people weren't allowed to be educated or anything like that. As we talked about a couple lessons ago, when we talked about Frederick Douglass learning to read and how that was illegal, and then he was teaching other people how to read the New Testament and the Bible, and these Christian Southern slave owners were going and beating them up and breaking up their church services to keep these guys from learning to read. So a lot of these African American slaves, or former slaves at this point now, these guys, they're completely uneducated. They don't know how to do anything except for work on these farms. And so, if you're going to be a person who is, running your own whatever, just your own life in general, you need to have some sort of education, and these guys don't have it at this point. So African Americans also set up schools. By 1870, so this is just 5 years after Abraham Lincoln was assassinated. 5 years after the end of the Civil War, though. By 1870, the African Americans had spent over $1 million on education. Several colleges and universities for African Americans were founded in the South. Among these were Fisk University in Tennessee and Spelman College in Georgia. Congress and President Andrew Johnson supported the Freedmen's Bureau, but they clashed over who would control other parts of Reconstruction. Now, few presidents have been more unpopular than Andrew Johnson. This guy was not well liked, and it did not help that he was coming right on the heels of Abraham Lincoln, who, even though a lot of people thought, oh, this guy's never going to win the Civil War, and the South hated him, of course, but Abraham Lincoln was a really well-respected president, and it's kind of almost a natural instinct to not speak ill of the dead. So Abraham Lincoln was assassinated. He died, as almost one of the final deaths in the Civil War. And so a lot of people, even if maybe they didn't super like him before, they have positive feelings towards him because of that, just because of the sorrow they feel over his death and his murder. And so consequently, some of those things that they didn't like about Lincoln have been almost smoothed over just by the fact that he's dead. And so I think Andrew Johnson maybe had to deal a little bit with Abraham Lincoln being, just this larger than life character at this point, just because of everything that had happened. But also Andrew Johnson was kind of a jerk, so nobody liked him. Anyway, Southerners disliked him because he had supported the Union. Andrew Johnson was actually from the South. That was one of the reasons why Abraham Lincoln had picked him. Northerners disliked him because he allowed former Confederate leaders to serve in Congress. He also took no action when Southern states passed black codes. That's one of your vocabulary words, is the black codes. And those were laws that restricted the rights of African Americans. So basically, the United States has come back together, and the government says, hey, all these slaves are free. They're free people. And Southern states say, okay, that's cool. We're just going to pass a whole bunch of laws that basically say, yeah, you're free, but you've got all these restrictions on you that almost make you, almost put you back into slavery, but without using the word slave, is really what they were trying to do. The House of Representatives voted to impeach Johnson. So to impeach is to impeach official with wrongdoing. I'm sorry, let me read that again. To impeach is to charge an official with wrongdoing. We just saw that recently with President Trump was impeached, of course. Also prior to him, this would be when your parents most likely were in middle school, high school-ish range, maybe college. But Bill Clinton was impeached as well. So he was a president, he was Hillary Clinton's husband, is Hillary Clinton's husband. But he was the previous president to be impeached. And actually, I think he might be it might be Bill Clinton, Trump, and Andrew Johnson might be the only presidents who have been impeached. The big one, of course, that everybody thinks of when they talk impeachment is Nixon, but Nixon wasn't impeached because he resigned from office before he would have been impeached. Nixon definitely would have been convicted if he'd been impeached, so him resigning was a way to save himself, basically. Yeah, anyway, both Bill Clinton, Trump, and Andrew Johnson survived their impeachment. So we've impeached 3 presidents at least. As far as I know, just the 3. And none of them have been kicked out of office. The only one who would have been kicked out of office wasn't impeached because he resigned first. So anyway, to impeach is to charge an official with wrongdoing. If 2/3 of the 36 senators voted against Johnson, he would have been removed from office. The vote was 35 to 19. he remained in office, but the division between North and South also remained. So, I just did some research here. So, in looking at this, the book has a little bit of a misprint here. So it said if 2/3 of the 36 senators had voted against Johnson, he would have been removed from office. No. 36 is 2/3 of the officers. So when it says the vote was 35-19, what that means is that if one of those 19 people had voted to remove him from office, so impeaching is just charging him with the crime. It's basically saying, hey, we're going to have a trial to say that this guy did this crime. It's not actually removing him. So, but if one more person had voted with the 35, then he would have been removed from office. Basically, he remained in office, but the division between North and South remained. So you had a clear majority. Most of the of Congress thought that he had violated some rules. We can talk about what those are, but really what it comes down to is Congress passed a law that said that the president, his cabinet has to be, approved by Congress, and if he wants to dismiss someone, that also has to be approved by Congress. And Johnson dismissed one of Lincoln's, actually one of his main guys, and so in doing so, Congress said, "Oh, you violated this law," and then his defense was like, "Well, we didn't know that. This wasn't even his person. We didn't know that was how it was supposed to be." And there's a lot of like little itty bitty infighting, but I think it probably came down to the fact that they just weren't sure what would happen if you had Congress actually remove a president. There was a lot of people who were worried about what the precedent that would set, and really what it was is it came down to the fact that the Republican Congress didn't like the fact that Johnson was so lenient on the Confederates and that he was letting them pass all those laws against blacks and things like that. Part B says Congress takes action. After 2 years of struggling with President Johnson over who would control Reconstruction, Congress passed the first Reconstruction Act in 1867. This act divided the South into 5 districts. The districts remained under control of the U.S. Army until new governments could be formed. Each state had to write a new constitution. Before Lincoln's death in 1865, Congress approved the 13th Amendment. This amendment abolished slavery. During Reconstruction, a southern state had to ratify the 13th Amendment in order to return to the Union. Other amendments that passed after Lincoln's death guaranteed rights to African Americans. In 1868, the 14th Amendment made African Americans citizens of the United States and guaranteed them the same legal rights as whites. This is interesting because, of course, here we are, 1868, and it's basically 1968 before this really is used the way it's supposed to be. Actually the 14th Amendment, a lot of that was passed in reaction to the black codes, the laws that the South was passing and that Johnson was allowing them to pass. Basically, it was a way to make those laws unconstitutional because Congress, of course, was having difficulty stopping them because Johnson kept getting in their way. And so they said, fine, we'll just have an amendment to the Constitution that makes it illegal to do this. However, these things still happen. In 1870, the 15th Amendment made it illegal for states to deny a man's right to vote. Women were not included in the amendment. Sorry, ladies, you still can't vote. Now, interesting here, it says that it's illegal for states to deny a man's right to vote. So basically, what the southern states were doing is they were passing laws that said, oh, hey, it's fine, everybody can vote, you just have to be able to read this ballot, or you have to be able to read this little document to prove that you are smart enough to vote, essentially. But you have all these former slaves who it was illegal to teach them to read, so of course they can't read it. It was designed purposefully to keep them from being able to vote. And honestly, probably if you were a white guy and you walked in and you couldn't read it, they'd still have let you vote. They just would have whispered the answers to you, that sort of thing. But it's just one of those things where we had laws that were designed to keep African Americans from voting, and Congress is trying to pass all these amendments to make it harder and harder to use those laws. But it's whether or not it's working is probably debatable. In fact, it really doesn't work until much later. Anyway, a new way of life. So after the Civil War, most plantation owners had little money to pay workers. So of course now they don't have slaves, they actually have to pay people and they can't do it. Instead, they rented out their fields. Landowners usually accepted part of the crop grown on their land as rent, sometimes as much as one half of the crop. The system of renting land in return for a share of the crop raised on it is called sharecropping. So that's another one of your vocabulary words. It sounds fair, but most people who worked in the fields remained poor. Yeah. So really, what it is it's kind of a way to, a lot of the sharecroppers were these African Americans who, they don't know a whole lot other than growing these crops. So the Southern plantation owners, sometimes even the exact same guy who owned these people, said, "Yeah, sure, you can have a portion of my land. You just have to grow the crops and give me some of what you grow." But they take such a large percentage that it keeps these people, really subservient and basically keeps them in a form of slavery, even if it's not official slavery. So anyway, the sharecroppers did not make much money because the price of cotton was low. Many farmers had to borrow money to survive. By doing this, they slipped deeply into debt. Northerners in the South. At the same time, many Northerners moved to the South to start businesses. They soon became active in the fight for African American rights. Southerners often called these Northerners carpetbaggers because many carried suitcases made of carpeting. Many Southerners believed that the carpetbaggers were taking advantage of the South's suffering. Many carpetbaggers were former Union soldiers or members of the Freedmen's Bureau who wanted to settle in the South. So really what you have is the North, has largely remained untouched. We talked about, most of the battles for the Civil War took place in the South. So very few northern cities, in fact, no northern cities that I know of, were damaged during the Civil War. So consequently, the North's economy is still intact. And so you have people who are, maybe sort of wealthy or maybe not even all that wealthy, but they say, hey, the South needs a lot of help growing. So why don't we go down and we can set up a business down in the South and just kind of a way for them to, have an opportunity to move south, find opportunities that maybe they don't have in the North, but also, yeah, they are kind of taking advantage of the situation that the South is in, but it just is what it is. It's a way for them to make money, so that's what they did. Okay, so here's a picture of a carpetbagger from a newspaper. Right there. So the question above it says, what was the cartoonist's opinion of carpetbaggers? Well, if you look at it, it doesn't look like they have a very good opinion of them, does it? So the little thing says, from Wisconsin to Missouri, carpetbaggers south. But really, they kind of look like not very nice guys. All right, so Part C, Reconstruction ends. During Reconstruction, more than 600 African Americans were elected to state office and 16 were elected to Congress. Among them were Hiram R. Revels and Blanche K. Bruce from Mississippi, who were both elected to the United States Senate. Some Southern whites were not ready to accept and treat African Americans as equals. So, by the way, here's the pictures of those guys that I was just talking about. Many white Southerners didn't want African Americans to hold public office. They did not want to pay higher taxes for schools and roads that help African Americans. Some Southerners turned to violence to terrorize African Americans and their white supporters. In 1866, so just 1 year after Lincoln is assassinated, former Confederate officers formed the Ku Klux Klan, because of course it was former Confederate officers. Disguised in white robes and hoods, they terrorized African Americans, driving them from their homes and destroying their property. They used, quote, night raids and murder to keep African Americans from voting. African Americans working for the whites were often told they would be fired if they voted. So they would be told they would be fired if they voted. Sometimes whites kept the locations of voting places secret from African American voters. In some places, African Americans were forced to pay illegal poll tax in order to vote. Many people could not afford to pay the tax. Jim Crow laws. In the presidential election of 1876, Democrat Samuel J. Tilden of New York won the popular vote. The electoral vote, however, was in question in some states, including 3 in the South. The Republican candidate, Rutherford B. Hayes, promised to remove all Union troops from the South if the electoral votes were cast for him. The Democrats from the South, who were white, voted for the Republican in order to end Reconstruction. So, here you go. Rutherford B. Hayes is like, hey, Reconstruction's over. You guys do whatever you want. Just make me president. So, in the end, that lure of power, this guy's a Republican, and one of their big tenets was ending slavery, all that stuff. And then as soon as it comes down to, hey, this can make you president, the guy's like, yeah, totally. Reconstruction's over. So those Democrats in the South voted for the Republican in order to end Reconstruction. President Hayes quickly ordered the removal of federal troops, bringing an end to Reconstruction. After federal troops left, Southern states began a policy called segregation. Segregation is the separation of people based on race. That's one of your vocabulary words. Another one is the Jim Crow laws made segregation legal in the South. Under Jim Crow laws, blacks and whites could not use the same schools, restaurants, railroad cars, hotels, or parks. In 1896, the Supreme Court in Plessy versus Ferguson ruled that separate but equal services were constitutional. In reality, the services were rarely equal. Okay, so separate but equal is one of the big black eyes of the Supreme Court. Probably right up there with when they said that if you're a slave and you're taken into a free state, doesn't matter, you're still property, you're still a slave. So here we have separate but equal. So essentially they were saying it is legal to have a school for black kids and a school for white kids because they're separate, but these are equal schools, except that they weren't equal schools. In fact, they were far from it. The school for the white kids tended to be much better funded and have better teachers and things like that than the schools for the black kids, which is a travesty, but that's what happened. Unfortunately, just fighting the Civil War doesn't end racism, even if it ended slavery. In the late 1800s, African Americans experienced discrimination in the North as well as the South. African Americans in the North were often not allowed in many public places. Although Reconstruction granted equal citizenship, segregation resulted in unequal treatment. African Americans did not gain many of the rights guaranteed by the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments until the Civil Rights movements of the 1950s and 1960s. So it's this, sad tragedy here that we have, 1865, the Civil War ends, but it's not until the 1960s that we really start to do the things that kind of achieve the ideals that a lot of people were hoping that the Civil War might bring along. Though, in fairness, a lot of the people who were in favor of ending slavery, so the abolitionists, not all of them thought that African Americans were equal to whites. They just didn't think that slavery was a good thing. So it's really not until those 1960s that we start seeing people say, no, there is no difference. The color of your skin does not change the character, of who you are. So if you're black, it doesn't mean that you're worse than if you're white, or vice versa, or anything like that. It doesn't matter. But I mean, it was until the 1960s that we really started to get there. And even then, there's a lot of people who could argue that even today, it's still not quite there, but we're at least moving in the right direction. So that finishes Unit 6. I hope that you enjoyed these. I apologize that some of them were very long. I guess I'll probably send the test home for you guys or something. And I'll give an answer key out later. But that takes care of the Civil War. Unit 7 is going to be The Nation Grows. So we won't have nearly the amount of wars that we'll talk about. We will talk a little bit about, there's always some fighting because of course there is. But that's it for this. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed it and I'll talk to you later. Hey, fifth graders. Okay, so this is actually just the answer key because I didn't want to make a separate video for the answer key for Unit 6, Lesson 6. So here it is. Also, it's gotten dark. I've been editing videos all day. So fun times for me, right? So number 1, what did the Freedmen's Bureau do? So the Freedmen's Bureau, the answer is C, provided food, shelter, jobs, and medical care for African Americans and whites. Okay. Number 2, What did Southerners call Northerners who moved to the South to start businesses after the Civil War? They called them carpetbaggers. A, that was the cartoon, remember? So A, carpetbaggers is the answer to number two. Number three, which of the following groups formed to prevent African Americans from gaining equal rights? That is D, the Ku Klux Klan. It was started by 6 Confederate officers. So number four, give one example of how African Americans were involved in politics during Reconstruction. Obviously this is a part where you'd be writing a little bit of stuff here, but there was more than 600 African Americans were elected to state office. 16 were elected to Congress. That's really all the book kind of talked about, which is sad. So there's a lot more stuff that went on, and I would encourage you to look up Hiram Revels, I think is how you pronounce his name, and Blanche K. Bruce, the two guys whose pictures you showed. Hiram Revels is the guy that's right next to this number four thing. Anyway, there was actually a lot of people who were doing a lot of interesting things. However, your book just says 600 were elected to state offices and 16 were elected to Congress. So probably something along that lines is what you'd put down. Number five, explain one reason many Southerners disliked carpetbaggers. So the book said that they believed that they were taking advantage of the South's suffering. So that would be the most obvious answer. But honestly, they just spent the last 4.5-ish years fighting against the South, or fighting against the North. So of course Southerners didn't like Northerners coming down and setting up businesses. There's for a long time still this belief that the South should be its own thing, and these Northerners were forcing them to be part of the United States. A lot of it just had to do with the fact that they just fought a war against each other, so they're not going to like each other right away. But yeah, so the book said, of course, that they thought they were taking advantage of their suffering. Okay, so vocabulary. Number one, blank is the separation of people based on race. That is segregation. Number two, blank were laws that restricted the rights of African Americans. That was the Black Codes. Number three, blank was Lincoln's plan for rebuilding the South. Reconstruction was the name of his plan. Number four, this is a system of renting land in return for a share of the crops that were raised. So sharecropping, of course. Number five, this made segregation legal in the South. It was the Jim Crow laws made segregation legal in the South. So that covers the end of everything for that packet. So you should have all the answers at this point. And like I said, I'll probably have a test that'll go home in the next batch of things. So good luck with that, and I will see you guys later.